Today we are going to be working on the basics of the Python syntax. So we've already downloaded Python and set up our development environment in VS Code. So if you haven't done so already, please go check that video out just to make sure you are all set up and prepared for this tutorial. So what are the basics of the Python syntax? Well, there are many ways to answer this question, but in my humble opinion, the basics of Python include the print function, data types, operators, and variables. So that's what we will be covering in this video. So let's start with the print function. Let's first open up Visual Studio Code. So if you're on a Mac, just do Command space and type in code, and it should pop up. And you can navigate to the directory we were working with before. If you remember, we wrote a really quick hello world script in Python. It doesn't matter what you name the file or the folder, it's the code that matters, but just make sure you navigate to that folder and then we can get started. So on the screen, you should already have print, and then within parentheses and a set of quotation marks, you should see hello world. So from there, we're gonna get started by first dissecting what's on the screen right now. And the best way to understand how Python works is to actually run the code that we've typed and see what the output is. So if you go over to terminal, create a new terminal window, and you can do clear. Again, your terminal might look slightly different than mine, and that's just because I set up ZSH and iTerm, so that's what's running in the background. If you don't know what that means, no worries. You have a regular terminal working. The functionality should be the same. It's just the aesthetics and appearance that changes. Okay, so in your terminal, just make sure that your directory is correct. In my case, I'm in the Python folder, and that's about it. Just navigate to the folder in which your file is in. If you're not in the correct folder, just do cd, which is change directory, and then the name of your folder. In this case, I don't have another folder in here, so I can just backspace. One really important thing to keep track of is in your file, you have this VS Code folder. That's auto updated by Visual Studio Code, right? That's a folder that Visual Studio Code creates whenever you open a folder in VS Code. Some of you might have that turned off when you first download VS Code, so you can go turn it on. It's not that big of a deal, but basically it just has a settings.json page. Once you get into more advanced programming, you can set up your own settings, but until then, just ignore the VS Code folder. So all you have to do is just click on this arrow and it should minimize. And we can close that out. So the first thing we need to make sure we understand is the print function itself. So you have print, which basically stands for an output in the terminal. The way you run this code in the terminal is by typing in Python 3, which is our version of Python, and then the name of the file we are trying to run using Python 3, which is hello.py. So any .py extension means that that code is written in Python, just like a .text extension means that the file is a text file. So this is a Python file, therefore you can run it using Python 3, which we've already installed. So if you just click enter, you should get hello world, which is what we want, but that might not make sense to you, so we will dissect the code. The first thing we need to make sure of is that we understand what the print function does. So the print function just shows an output in the terminal. It's very useful for debugging complex projects, and it's generally the first thing we learned. So we have the print function and then hello world within quotation marks. So first of all, this is what the print function looks like in like a bare bones form, right? You just have print and then parentheses. Whatever's within that parentheses gets printed. But for somebody who's never programmed before, there's a certain programming concept called data types, which we will cover in this video. But that's what causes you to have different types of formatting inside your print function. So if you, for example, have quotation marks, that refers to a string, which we will talk about more. But whenever you want to print text, you're gonna have to put those quotation marks, and we will talk about why. So if you want to print out hello, you have to put it within a set of quotation marks. It doesn't matter in Python whether it's single quotations or double quotations. In other languages like C++, the data type does change between single quotes and double quotes, but in this case, they just stay the same. So you print, and then you have these quotation marks, and then just whatever text you want to print in between them. When the output comes in the console, if you click up arrow, it just takes the previous command from the terminal, so you don't have to retype it, and then click enter, and it runs. Now you see it only prints hello, right? And a really quick important thing is that I have auto saving on in Visual Studio Code. You might not have that feature on. It's not important or anything. It just helps me when I'm teaching a new programming concept. I don't have to remember to save it. But just after you make any changes and before running the code, just click Control S if you're on Windows and Command S if you're on Mac, and that should save your file. So we just print hello, and that's what shows up in the output. But the important thing to note is that the quotations don't get printed, because that's just telling Python that basically the code getting, or the text getting printed, is a string. Okay. So once you're clear with how the print function works, we should be able to print a number. So if we try printing 3 within quotation marks and then run it, you can see it prints out 3. But since 3 is a number, you don't need those quotation marks. Only for words or letters do you need a quotation mark, or a set of quotation marks. So if you just say print 3, you can see it also prints 3. But these 3s are different, which might be confusing initially, but we will explore why a 3 with quotation marks and a 3 without quotation marks are two different things. Another thing to keep in mind, these are just basic general rules, is that you can check the type of a specific thing you're trying to pass in, right? So in this case, we want to check the type of 3. You can say type like this. And I know we are kind of dabbling into the world of data types already, but just wait a couple seconds and I'll explain what data types are and why we use them. But if you click enter, now it prints out class int. It no longer prints out 3. Instead, it says that this is an int, which is short for integer, right? So 3 is an example of an integer, and we will talk about what that means. So once you understand the print function, then we can go into data types. So data types is exactly what it sounds like. They're types of data they're the types of data you can use in Python. Most programming languages have the same data types. Just Python maybe spells it differently, or has less data types, because it's just more user friendly. So if you're coming from a language like C++ to Python, it will be very, very easy for you to change because there's less stuff for you to keep track of. But if you're completely new to programming, data types might be your first confusing topic to understand. So when we talk about data in Python, we are mainly referring to either text or numbers. So if we have text like hello, this is just a string of letters, right? It's just like a continuous flow of letters, and therefore we call this flow or string of letters a string. So that's the data type. For example, if we want to print the type of hello, we do have to put it in quotation marks. If we print the type of hello, we get class string, right? So now we know that hello is a string because there's those quotation marks, and also it's just a continuous flow of letters. Now, if we remove that quotation mark and try to print it, here we go. So we get, it's very important for you to learn how to read these errors in Python. So we'll practice with this basic error. It says trace back most recent call last, which basically means there was an error with the last thing we called, which is hello world.py. And it says file hello world.py on line 1. Because we only have one line of code, it's kind of obvious that the error should be on line 1. But if you have like hundreds of lines of code, that feature can come in really handy or can be really bad, because VS Code doesn't do that well of a job of finding the error. Or rather the terminal doesn't. So sometimes that might be misleading. So definitely go through all of your code to check for the error. And then it says, basically the error is in print hello, which is the only code we have on the screen. And then it says the name hello is not defined. Whenever you put words without any sort of quotation mark or indication that it's a data type or a specific data type, Python assumes that that word is the name of a variable. And we will talk about variables in Python, but basically the idea is that it just stores some sort of value. Okay, so whenever you don't put quotation marks, it assumes that it's the name of a variable. If we end these quotation marks right there, put hello and Python 3 hello world.py, it prints out hello again, no error. So that's how we know that our script is fully functional. Okay, so once we finish understanding this print function and the data type string, there's another data type we want to keep in mind. So really quickly, I will put hashtag string. So now a hashtag in Python just stands for a comment. So a comment is just a line, some words that basically the code or Python ignores when it reads the code and runs it. So usually you use comments to explain what you're doing in the code. So when other developers or other programmers are reading your code, they know what's going on. So we know that this is an example of a string. Now let's have an example of printing out an integer. So if you've taken like basic arithmetic, I don't know if it's in Algebra 1 or Algebra 2 or something like that, but basically you should know what an integer is. It's just any number, basically, any whole number, no decimals, at least in Python. So if we want to print out an integer and we have 3, we don't need those quotation marks, because the moment you put a quotation mark, it thinks it's a string. So you could put a number within quotation marks and it would read as a string, but if you try to put words without quotation marks, it's not going to read as an integer. It only reads numbers as integers. So now if we run it, you can see it says hello, because first it runs the code on line 2, remember it ignores line 1, and then it reads print 3, right? So then it prints out 3. But the thing is, these are two different data types. If we hover over hello, I think this should work. Okay, only if it's a variable will it work. But basically, if we print out the type of 3, or not type of, sorry, just the type of 3, and then we print out over here the type of hello, just to check what type they are, what data type they are, and then we run the code. You can see hello is going to be a class of string. You don't need to worry about classes. Just know that the data type is a string because there's quotation marks. And then when you print out 3, you see that the class or data type is an integer, or int for short form. Another thing to keep in mind, when you put these quotation marks and then the output is not changing, right? You're still getting hello and then 3. So visibly, making 3 a string does not matter, right? But the important thing is if you look over here and we change the type to 3, Python 3 hello world.py, you can see that we get class string. So now 3 is a string because of those quotation marks. Okay, so I'm sure you're wondering by now, why does it matter what data type 3 is? Either way, it's printing out the same thing. In which case, you are right, it doesn't matter in this case. But when you try to do things like addition or subtraction, then when you try to add 2 strings together, if you try to add 3 plus 3 when both 3's are strings, it's not going to give you 6. And we will talk about operators in just a bit. There's just a couple more data types I want to quickly touch on just to keep you prepared. So let's break with floats. Once you understand the purpose and the function of an integer, floats are really easy. Floats just have a floating number, just has a decimal point attached to it. For example, first let me go fix this so that you don't get confused. An integer will not have these quotation marks I was just showing you. So we print a float, 3.3. Okay, so if you print, let's bring this line down, and if you print the type of 3.3, you might think it might print integer, but no, it will print out float, right? Because there's that 0.3. What's interesting is 3.0 and 3 are the same number to us, but when we actually run the code, we think that 3.0 is a float because you added that 0.0, which means there's a decimal, right? So even though 3.0 equals 3, even though those two values are the same, they are different data types in Python. Okay, so we're done with string, integer, and float. Now we have our last data type that you need to worry about in this tutorial and in your entire beginner journey of Python. This is mainly the data types you will be working with. This last one is called a Boolean, and we abbreviate it as Boolean. So if you, or Python abbreviates it. So a Boolean is just either true or false. So if you're checking a condition, is sunny, right? You're checking if it's sunny outside, in which case it is, at least in my neighborhood. So then is sunny would be true. It's a true statement. So we would print out true. And notice that we don't have any quotation marks or anything because it's a Boolean. It's not a piece of text, it's a Boolean. And if we do print type of true, and notice it's a capital T. The moment you put lowercase, it's not a keyword, but the moment you put a capital true, then it realizes it's Boolean, and if you print it out, the last thing is of class bool. Okay, so basically it prints out true. Even if you put it in quotation marks, the output would be the same, but the class would be string. So now let's, I hope you understand the type function as well, really quick, because that will come up very, very handy when you do when you change between data types. Checking the type will be very helpful. And of course, through this series of Python, we will be working with changing data types, so you don't need to worry about learning any of this stuff on your own. Just follow this course and you should understand the basics of Python by the end of it. So once you understand that type function and some basic data types, let's talk about why does it matter between a string and an integer, whether this integer has quotations around it or not. So the main thing with integers is that you can add them. So if you wanted to print 3 plus 4, what do you think the output is going to be? It's going to be 7. But that's because if we print the type, oops, I can't type today. So if we want to press the print out the type of 3 plus 4, we're going to get int. So I'll just copy this here, just to make it clear. So this is the case of adding integers. The spacing between 3 and the plus operator and 4 doesn't matter, and addition is called, the addition symbol is called an operator in Python. So this is adding integers. But now let's check if we made, well, first of all, let's add strings. So there's a couple ways to add strings. So if you added 3 like this and then added the plus outside of the string and then 4, and then you print out the type of, and then we'll just copy it from here. If you printed this out, the top one will say 7 and integer, like we checked last time, but the bottom one will now say 34 and string, which is quite important to understand. It's actually a topic in Python called string concatenation, where you add 2 strings together. So when you print out 3 plus 4 and they're both strings, it's just gonna smash the 2 together. Instead of doing 3 plus 4 is 7, it's just gonna say 3 and 4, put it together, 34. And that's what it's gonna print out. Now, of course, if you put a space in here, it's gonna print out 3 space 4. Right? So strings are very, very naive in that way. They don't do, well, they're not supposed to do any operators other than addition for string concatenation. But what makes things interesting is if you just put, if you take this and just say 3 plus 4 like this, right? Because what's supposed to happen? Well, you can notice that purple highlighting over the plus sign is now gone because it's no longer a keyword. It's no longer outside the string. So if you can just think about what your prediction is, what's going to print out for that line 6 and line 7, it's going to be 3 plus 4. So literally it's going to print out 3 plus 4, and you're going to have a class or a data type of string. And that's the main difference, right? So a integer is going to print out the actual addition term, right? I forgot what the word is called when you add 2 things. Oh, the sum. Sorry. Yeah. So line 2 and 3 are going to print out your sum because it's an integer, while line 6 and 7 is going to print out a string, just 3 plus 4. Okay, so now we figured out how to add things. You can forget about adding strings for now. Just remember that word, string concatenation. Why don't we try multiplying things? So this data type is not going to change, right? It's still going to stay as an integer, and now it's 12. And similarly, you can do the divide sign. So the asterisk sign is the multiplication sign, and then the divide sign is just a slash, and then subtraction sign, just the regular minus. But what's important is that there's another operator that you should get familiar with, and that's going to be your percent sign, which we call a modulus or modulo. So if you take the percent sign, let's change these numbers so that it's a little more clear. So let's say 12 percent or modulo 4, and you get 0. So what does that mean? Well, the modulus symbol is checking for your remainder. So why don't we take 12 over here and 4 over here? So divide the two. What's 12 divided by 4? That's going to be 3. So 12 divided by 4 is 3. And how much is remaining? 0, right? You don't have a remainder. 4 goes into 12 perfectly. So therefore, it's going to print out a modulus of 0. But what if we did 12 modulus 2? Or that's also going to go in perfectly, 5. So first of all, it goes into 12 once, but we don't care about that. All we care about is the remainder. So once it goes into 12, or what am I saying? It goes into 12 twice, right? But remaining 2 times 5 is 10. So there's still 2 left over. 12 minus 10 is 2. So you're going to have a remainder of 2, right? 2 remainder 2. And so if you take the 12 modulus 5, you're going to, whoops, I should comment that out. There we go. So we get printed out 2, and the class is integer because 2 is going to be an integer. So that's going to be your basic modulus function and how to use it. There's just one more thing, one more operator that we should focus on that kind of segues really nicely into our next topic, which is variables. So this operator is called your assignment operator. It's an equal sign. This is considered an operator in Python. Basically, its purpose is just to assign variables. Okay, so if you've taken Algebra 1, you know what a variable is. A variable is just some sort of symbol. It can be a letter or like a Greek alphabet that represents either a string, any data type basically. So that's why data types are important. You can have a variable named, let's say name equals, and then your name is most likely, your name is most likely going to be a string, right? So let's say Vishnu, my name, and then we say print Vishnu, or print name. And what should it print out? It should print out Vishnu. And whenever you have a variable, if you hover over it, it does say that the type is string, which is pretty cool right here. So type string. So you don't even have to do that checking that type, but you can if you want to. You can print out the specific type. There we go. And it only prints out that the class is a string, which is what we want. So once we get that down, we know that name can be Vishnu. Here's that equals operator for you. How about we work with age? So age is 16, let's say. And if we try the age, you can see 16 pops up. But if you hover over it, it says type is int. So no longer string, it's an integer. So if you hover over age, it says the type is integer. And if you hover over name, it says that the type is string. Perfect. And you can also have it be a floating point, right? So you can say, I'm just trying to think. Okay, height. And I'm going to go with something unreasonable. So like 13.3. I don't know what unit that's in. Okay, but I just need a floating point variable and that equals operator. So if we do height, that's the type float. And lastly, let's go with is funny, which is going to be a boolean. You can name these variables whatever you want. Just the data that they contain is the is what you're looking for when you say. So is funny, just because it's named is funny, you're checking a condition, doesn't make it a boolean. You have to either enter true or false, which in this case is false. So then if you hover over is funny, it says false right there, and it doesn't display the that it's a boolean. But if you just literally print out the type of is funny, I hope this will work. There we go. Class is bool. So it shows you that it's a boolean. So this is pretty much the basics of variables. The last thing you can do with a variable that's truly meaningful is you can say x is 10, y equals 20. So first of all, quick pop quiz. What is x and y? Like what data type do they contain? So it's going to be integers, right? Both are integers. And if you say print x plus y, you can do any operator other than the equal sign here. You can see we get 30. Okay, So, which is pretty cool. It just adds those two variables together. And if these become strings, and then you print out x plus y, first of all, what data type is x plus y going to be? It's still going to stay a string, right? And then if we print it out, it's going to say 1020, because it just puts those two numbers together. Okay. So that's the basics of variables, data types, and operators. We also worked on the print function today. So that's basically it for this video. We will continue talking about data types through conditional logic, lists, and dictionaries. So I'll see you all in the next video.